Nobody threw them a parade. Nobody stopped to ask if they were okay. Nobody even noticed they were carrying something heavy because they never let it show. Generation X, born between 1965 and 1980, the generation that raised themselves, built the modern world, and then quietly stepped aside while everyone else took the credit. Psychology has a name for what shaped them. Not trauma, not resilience, something more specific than both. This is the psychology of a generation, raised without applause. 1. The empty house. Picture this. It is 1976. You are 9 years old. The school bus drops you off at the corner. You walk to your front door, you reach into your collar, and pull out a key on a string around your neck. No parent waiting inside, no babysitter, no note on the counter, no way to call anyone. Just you, an empty house, and the next few hours to figure out on your own. This was not unusual. By 1984, nearly 7 million American children were regularly home alone after school. 7 million kids learning the same lesson at the same time. If something goes wrong, you are the one who has to fix it. Psychologists call the environment those children grew up in a high-contingency environment. Actions have real consequences, immediately, without a buffer, no one to call, no one to negotiate with. You made a choice. You lived with what happened next. Their brains adapted to that. They started running simulations constantly, 2 steps ahead, 3 steps ahead, because that is how you survive when no one is coming to rescue you. They were not born serious. They were made serious by a world that needed them to be. 2. The generation nobody mentioned. Here is the strange thing about Gen X. Every other generation has a story. The greatest generation saved the world. Boomers changed it. Millennials inherited its collapse. Gen Z is rebuilding from the rubble. And Gen X kept the lights on while everyone argued about who deserved the building. They are sandwiched so perfectly between boomers and millennials that most cultural conversations about generations skip from one to the other, without pausing, without noticing the people in the middle who quietly held everything together. Psychology describes this as generational invisibility. The experience of belonging to a cohort whose defining traits, self-sufficiency, discretion, quiet competence, make them structurally easy to overlook. They don't demand attention. They never learned how, and the world took them at their word. 3. What the institutions taught them. Gen X watched something happen to their parents that rewired how they see the world permanently. Their fathers gave 30 years to companies, loyal, present, dependable, and got a layoff notice and a handshake. Their parents preached commitment and then divorce at the highest rates in American history. The government told them nuclear war could arrive any Tuesday and to crouch under a desk when it did. The message that landed, the one that stuck, was this: structures fail, promises dissolve. Systems will betray you if you let yourself depend on them. Psychologists call the pattern that developed defensive pessimism. You hope, but you plan for the collapse. You prepare for the version where it falls apart, not because you are negative, but because you have watched it fall apart enough times to know it will. This is not cynicism. This is pattern recognition built from evidence. 4. The armor. Ask a Gen X person how they are doing. They will say, fine. And they will mean it, in the sense that they have already processed whatever is happening, contained it, managed it alone, and are now presenting you with the version that requires nothing from you. Research shows Generation X reports significantly lower rates of seeking social support during stress than any other living generation. Not because they don't have people, because somewhere early, asking for help got coded in their nervous system as something uncomfortably close to weakness. When you grow up in a house where you handle things alone, where expressing need produced nothing, where the emotional script was figure it out, keep moving. You stop expecting to be caught when you fall. You learn to fall quietly and land on your feet and never mention it happened. This built something remarkable in them, a capacity to function in crisis that genuinely impresses everyone around them. It also built a wall that the people who love them spend years trying to find a door in. 5. The work ethic nobody talks about. Gen X does not post about what they accomplish. They do not write LinkedIn manifestos about hustle. They do not document their achievements. They show up. They do the work. They do not require acknowledgement. This was forged before they were teenagers. Paper routes at 5 a.m., bagging groceries, and calculating change in their heads when the system went down. Babysitting entire families at 12 years old because someone had to. These were not resume builders. They were early, unfiltered, unsupervised lessons in adult responsibility, delivered to children who had no framework to understand that this was unusual. They just thought this was what growing up meant. Today, they are the people in your office who arrive before anyone else, leave after everyone else, and never once bring it up. They are the colleagues who somehow know what's about to go wrong before it goes wrong. They were trained to be indispensable, quietly, without fanfare, because they learned early that being loud about your value is what people do when they are not sure they have any. 6. The bridge they became. Gen X is the only generation alive that is fully fluent in two completely different worlds. They remember phone booths. They also built the internet. They remember a world with no information on demand, where if you didn't know something, you didn't know it, and you went to a library and spent 3 hours finding out. They also adapted to a world where everything is instant, searchable, available, and they did it mid-life, without complaint, without a tutorial. This created something psychologists describe as cognitive flexibility, the ability to hold two contradictory frameworks simultaneously, to translate between people who operate on completely different assumptions to function in the space between. At work, they are the ones who can explain to the 60-year-old executive why young employees need different things, and then turn around and explain to the 25-year-old why the process exists in the first place. They do this constantly, invisibly, without being asked, without being thanked. Bridges don't get applause. They just carry the weight silently between two places that would otherwise have no way to reach each other. 7. What it actually cost them. Here is the part nobody says out loud. Gen X is tired. And not in the way people say they're tired on the internet, looking for validation and a relatable meme. Tired in the structural way. The way a building gets tired when it has been holding load for longer than anyone noticed. They absorbed the economic shocks of the 80s and 90s. They entered the workforce during a recession. They bought houses before 2008 and watched equity disappear overnight. They are now in the middle years of their lives, sandwiched between aging parents who need care and children who need guidance, in a world more complex and more demanding than the one they were raised to navigate. And they are doing it with the same emotional toolkit they developed alone in that empty house when they were 9 years old, which is to say, quietly, competently, and without asking for a single thing. 8. What psychology actually says about them. Psychology does not look at Generation X and see a broken generation. It sees an adapted one. Their nervous systems were shaped by real conditions, genuine instability, institutional failure, early independence forced by circumstance, and they adapted with precision. They developed emotional self-regulation before they had language for it. They built strategic independence out of necessity. They cultivated ironic detachment as a form of psychological armor against a world that repeatedly broke its promises. These are not flaws. They are survival systems that served them well for a very long time. The question psychology asks now is not, what is wrong with them? The question is, what do people who were raised to need nothing do when they finally arrive at a moment where they are allowed to need something? And the honest answer for most of Gen X is this: they don't know. They were never taught. And that is not their failure. That is the gap that was left by a world that handed them a key on a string, pointed them at an empty house, and called it growing up. If you are Gen X, if you recognize the empty house, the key on the string, the specific skill of making sure no one ever knows how much you are carrying, psychology is not calling you damaged. It is calling you one of the most precisely adapted human beings of the last 100 years. You learn to function without applause, without safety nets, without anyone telling you that you were doing a good job. And you did the job anyway. You are still doing it. The invisible generation, the bridge generation, the one that held things together while everyone else was busy arguing about who deserved the credit. You deserved some of it. You still do.